Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to be here tonight as a mother and a New York City resident for over 17 years, and to continue the mission of New Yorkers for Safer Streets to educate families and residents on where candidates and elected officials stand on key issues that must be addressed to improve the quality of life for all New Yorkers, especially our vulnerable populations and our youth. Tonight, we launch a new series of Fireside Chats focused on getting to know the candidates running for office in New York City in partnership with Westside Community Organization and EDU Coalition. This series will educate the community on candidates who will be on the ballot in the June 2021 primaries. And what better way to kick off this series than with a candidate for mayor of New York City? Tonight, we welcome Loree Sutton. Welcome, Loree.
Thank you, Nicole. I am delighted to join you all tonight. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks so much for being here, Loree. Right now, many of us are unsettled by what is occurring and the uncertainty in New York City and what the future holds. Some of us are questioning if we can ever fully return to the workplace as working parents struggle to homeschool children and keep their jobs. Residents are disappointed with the sharp decline in quality of life citywide and asking whether it's worth staying at all. Many have said the weak will leave, but perhaps these residents aren't losing their jobs, becoming full-time homeschool teachers, seeing yet another small business fade away, or noticing the increase in dirtiness across our city. The pandemic has heightened awareness of serious crises plaguing our city, and tonight we will focus on two topics: homelessness and education, two crises that have grown for years, only made more apparent by the pandemic. We are being failed by current leadership, and we desperately need leaders who have a plan and a vision to address these serious issues at a time when these populations are most vulnerable. A continuation of the current model will lead to more homelessness, less educated children, and potential psychological, social, and emotional problems for both of these populations. We are glad that community groups with different agendas and ideas are willing to come together to hear from prospective leaders. While there are many things New Yorkers disagree on, we all agree that this is a time and an opportunity for progress and change to benefit all. Tonight is an evening for us to listen, to learn, and to understand more about how one prospective leader, Loree Sutton, plans to tackle these challenges we face. Over the next several months, we will host candidates and continue our discussions on these topics in addition to other topics that many of you have already suggested. We ask you to vote, ask your friends to vote, register to vote. In 2016, our current mayor, Mayor Bill de Blasio, won with 66% of the vote, but only 13% of New York City residents voted. 13%. It is imperative that New York City comes out strong and votes in the Democratic primaries, which are crowded with candidates. This year will be our first time doing ranked choice voting, and we will continue to educate you on what this means. But simply put, this requires knowing all of the candidates very well. The goal of our Fireside Chats is to give you time to get to know the candidates and explore who is up for the challenge facing New York City and who has the best plan to put our businesses, education, quality of life, and our entire city back on track. So let's dive right in tonight, Loree, with our first topic, education. It couldn't be more timely given that yesterday at 2 p.m., as a parent of a first grader, we got the call, parents, teachers, principals, caught off guard, the schools were going remote, effective immediately. Parents were understandably upset, given that school rates are at 0.19%, and knowing that gyms, indoor dining, and private schools would remain open. These sudden school closures will have a significant impact on less advantaged students whose parents don't have the means to pivot quickly. Schools seemingly were unprepared, emailing parents to stay tuned for remote learning schedules late last night. Do you believe that citywide school closures are necessary? And should this have been done differently?
Well, thank you so much, Nicole. I too was distressed to hear the news yesterday, and I've been distressed for a long time viewing this issue of school reopening. Let me start out by saying, none of these issues that have created the delays and the confusion and the halts and the forwards and now the stops, none of them were out of mind or unthinkable just a few months ago, back in March and April, when really this plan should have gone into very intense development. But, I have to say that we know how important in-person learning is. We know particularly K through 8 what a difference it makes. We know that our children with developmental disabilities and other conditions desperately need in-person learning. And we also know that we can do this without endangering or contributing to the current pandemic surge. I think that when the 3% threshold was set several months ago, it was a mark on the wall. It was, a fairly reasonable hunch at that point, given what we knew. But, as we know better, I don't know, I'll change my opinions as new facts come in and as we learn from our experience and we have more data and more analytics. And as you said, the fact that we know within schools it's 0.19%, we know that schools are not super spreader factories. We know that the fact that private schools and parochial schools will be remaining open. This is another nail in the coffin for New Yorkers who are able to leave the city to either take their kids out of schools or get out of the city altogether. It's wrong. And of course, it's very much tied into the quality of life issues such as crime, such as homelessness, that we'll be talking about later. But I couldn't agree more that the mayor was right on reopening schools. He led the way. His instinct was right. The governor was wrong on this. But the mayor just wasn't able to put together the kind of plan that would actually put the testing and the tracing and the mobilize the resources, which could have included, for example, college kids, incentivizing them to take a gap year to tutor. It could have included bringing in retired teachers to be able to lessen the load. It could have included going to the education schools here in the city. And just as with nursing students and medical students, they got curriculum credit earlier during the peak weeks and months of the pandemic earlier this year, they could get college and university graduate school credit for being able to help out. We could mobilize our restaurants who are desperate and dying all around us. We could have mobilized them. We still could, to be able to provide nutritious meals to our kids rather than meals that are brought in from out of state and that have a shelf life of months. It's just not, let me put it this way. Now is a time for every single one of us to let go of the world we thought we knew just 8 or 9 months ago. And what that does is it opens up opportunities and things that we could consider now that we never would have considered just a few months ago. But these could include, how about if we brought in our Broadway actors, our talent, and helped the teachers really, liven up their presentations? How about if we brought in our tech experts and the private sector and just said, listen, this is a barn raising. We've got thousands of kids around this city, both in shelters or as well as in NYCHA developments, as well as in overcrowded apartments all over, who do not have wireless. They do not have the equipment they need, and they do not have the learning environment that's necessary for them to be able to flourish. So on all kinds of levels, we have missed an opportunity with reopening schools. And I just, I'll just continue to shout from the mountaintops. I've put this out on my website. I have what I call the resilience and recovery triad. It's the safety triad, and it's all about safe schools, safe streets, and safe jobs. Those three are all integrally linked, and we have to restore safety, safe streets, safe schools, safe jobs as the foundation upon which all else depends going forward.
Thank you, Loree. I think that experts agree that remote learning, especially for our youngest students, does not come close to approximating the learning value students experience via in-person classroom learning. Looking ahead to next year and beyond, what do you think should be done to address the significant learning loss that will result from New York City's shift to remote, hybrid learning, and help our students to close the gap? What barriers do you foresee addressing this situation in the coming years? And what would you propose to overcome these impediments?
Well, really great questions, Nicole. And you're right. This isn't something that's just going to be over and done with this year. We have to account for what has happened and what we have gained and what we have lost. I would say going forward into the next year or two, I would seek to bring in some of the resources that I just talked about, because our city is not going to come to life immediately, but there are things that we can do to keep folks whole and businesses operating so that New York City does not devolve into a city of big box stores and chain restaurants. I think that it's going to be important for us to engage in public-private partnerships. Things like, perhaps we could move towards an adopt a school model where the private sector could adopt a school and we could have a collaborative network, and we could really bring some new resources towards both assessing how our children are doing and where they are in their learning, as well as to bring the kind of resources that are necessary for us to be able to immerse them in a sort of an accelerated catch-up period. We ought to be the world's leading experts on blended learning, given that the epicenter was here just a few months ago. I think we can still get there. We've got a lot of work to do, and I'm very concerned about those children who have disabilities and who are particularly affected by this. I'm also concerned about kids who, they don't have the kind of supervision or structure at home, and they're not attending class. And, we know that kids who drop out of school really are at such risk for addiction, for lifelong impairment, for early deaths, and this is particularly acute for boys. We know that the dangers of the COVID pandemic, as we talked about to begin with, they've been really exaggerated when it comes to schools. When you look at the data, and all of us should be very clear-eyed here, let's look at the data, and schools are not super spreader factories. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that the sooner we can get after it, that next mayor, she's going to have her hands full.
Thanks, Loree. Let's move on to gifted and talented schools. Quite a hot topic lately. The mayor and chancellor believe that accelerated classes in gifted and talented schools create inequity and intend to get rid of all of these programs, as well as the use of grades and testing to identify achievement. Opponents say that failing to offer accelerated programs in Black and Hispanic communities is the reason few accelerated learners come out of the public schools in these communities. Furthermore, getting rid of all accelerated programs in schools deprives opportunity for those who see education as a pathway for advancement, particularly low-income, minority, and immigrant students. What is your vision on the future of G&T programs, and do you have specific ideas on how accelerated learning can benefit more children in our school system of over 1 million children?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, when it comes to gifted and talented programs, I want to double and triple down. I want to bring those programs to the areas of the city, like areas of Queens and the Bronx and other places where they just, they're scarce in number, if at all. We need to add to the gifted and talented programs. We need to keep the specialized high schools. I think when it comes to the test, we don't want to dilute the test, but I think that if the Regents exam were used for admission to the specialized high school, at least the Regents exam focuses on what is actually taught in the classroom curriculum. So it lessens the need or the advantage for the expensive training and prep programs. But I think we got to go beyond that. I think we need to make sure that we allow our kids to really discover who they are. I don't want, our over 1.1 million kids here in New York City to think that they either get into a specialized high school or their life's over. Some kids are feeling that way. They're feeling that pressure. I want to be able to introduce kids at a very young age, starting in elementary school and then moving into middle school, and develop apprenticeships and pathways to learn more about tech and coding. And some of them will be interested in the trades. Others of them will be interested in screenwriting and perhaps set design and setup, all kinds of things. And that's the beauty of New York. Whatever they can dream of or think of, it's here somewhere, and we can connect them to it. We can listen to our employers. I know that the Partnership for New York City recently put together a Job and Careers Council where they're working with CUNY and the employers. And rather than focusing on degrees, they're focusing on providing the students with the skill sets that employers need but currently can't hire. And so I think those are the kinds of innovative partnerships that will be important. I mentioned the adopt a school idea earlier. I also think that we could increase the number of community centers. I think there are about 30 currently in the city, and they're generally located in the neighborhoods that are really in the most need. And I think there are more neighborhoods than we have community centers. But let me explain what I mean. These become regional and community resource hubs. They have year-round programming. My vision would be that you would have vocational counseling for not just the kids, but for the parents, so it becomes student-centered and family-centered. I think this is particularly important for immigrant families, and perhaps the parents are a little reticent or nervous about engaging with the school officials. If we made it a community center and really engaged public, private, philanthropic, and social sectors, we would be in a whole lot better shape than we are right now. This also would include regional community health hubs. We know that this pandemic has taught us that employment-based healthcare is just not tenable and doesn't serve us well, and particularly for those communities and kids of color. Let me just say one other thing, Nicole. I feel so strongly about this. I will not get into a debate pitting charter schools versus conventional public schools. I think that both have their place, and there's much that one can learn from the other. And I'll say this, when 50, 60, 70,000 families care enough to sign their kids up for the lottery, and we've got excess space, as mayor, I would absolutely open up that space and work to increase those opportunities. Think of the inequities there. Wealthy families, they have school choice, and sadly, that's some of the choices that they feel driven to right now, given all that we've talked about. But, poor kids and families, they've got the lottery. And the lottery's been held up and capped because of supposedly the space shortage. This is wrong. And I think that as we go forward, we must recognize that our kids are our treasure. We have what Silicon Valley, what Boston, what Austin, what Nashville will never have. We have the world right here. We just need to invest and nurture and cultivate our kids for service and success.
Thanks, Loree. I'm going to switch over now to talk about specialized high schools. So all of our questions tonight come from the audience. That's one of the best things about our forums. They are all driven by parents and families, and no special interest. So the next question is, the specialized high schools, Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, and Brooklyn Tech, have been the crown jewels of New York for close to 100 years. For just as long, admission to these schools has always been through a math and English language arts exam, which was codified into state law in 1971. Historically, and to this day, the majority of the students at these schools come from low-income, working-class immigrant families. Neither political influence nor wealth can influence an admission officer to give you a seat at these schools. As for diversity, a school like Brooklyn Tech has gone through phases of being majority white, majority Jewish, majority Black and Hispanic, and now majority Asian American. The mayor and chancellor see a lack of diversity at these schools and point to the admission test known as SHSAT as promoting segregation, whereas opponents say the real problem is recognizing that educational policies are not preparing certain students to be competitive on the exam. What is your opinion, and what would you do if elected mayor?
Yeah, so my opinion is, as things currently stand, you're right. There are wide swaths of our city where our kids are not being prepared to compete on these exams. I think that we have to be careful here. We cannot risk diluting the exam. I've mentioned already that I would favor using the Regents exam, which is already tied into the classroom curriculum. I would also favor, really amping up the prep services, the tutoring services, if families and kids want to pursue excelling on those exams, to make those available. But I think if a kid and a family have put in the work and have been able to, score well on the test, we need to work to make sure that everyone gets that opportunity and that we invest in our kids, and we also show them other pathways that they might be interested in as well. So there's no one-size-fits solution to this. I would be interested as well in engaging with the governor as well as the state legislature, and let's just take a holistic view, a systems perspective really at our educational system, and see where we are at this point and how we can best move forward. But to take away the gifted and talented and to say, that kids are just on their own if they don't live in the right neighborhood, I think that's just absolutely wrong.
And unfortunately, we're seeing that amid the pandemic, that many kids are on their own, without devices, without printers. I know as a parent of a first grader, I couldn't homeschool her without a device, a printer, and Wi-Fi every single day. So that really needs to be addressed in the city, and then the equity for those students, making sure they have what they need.
It needs to be a barn raising. I can't believe that we can't get Wi-Fi, we can't get connectivity and devices and learning environments to all of our kids well before June. It has to be a priority. There's nothing more important than the future well-being, the learning, the education, and the success of our kids. They're going to be New Yorkers. They're going to take our places. They're going to lead this city forward. And we owe it to them to be able to invest fully in their potential and their success.
Thank you. The next question is, do you support charter schools and feel they are effective, or do you support the current administration to dismantle all other options than public schools, or do you have a different vision altogether?
Yeah, so I think I went into this a little bit prematurely, but yes, I'm not going to get into a debate over, pitting charter schools over conventional public schools. Both have their place, and I do think that there's much that conventional schools can learn from the charter schools. Not all of them, but not all. It's you have to follow the data, and the data is compelling when you look at the kids whose parents have put them into the lottery, who've gotten them into charter schools, 60, 70,000 who are still waiting for that opportunity. I think we need to make that available. We also need to invest in our conventional public schools. So it's not an either or, but I would also go beyond that to the vision of increasing the conversion of schools to community centers with year-round programming, with healthcare, with vocational career counseling for the family, for the kids, with recreation, to really make it a hub all year round, a place where it's welcoming, where the private sector can come in, maybe adopt a community center, can provide apprenticeships, can provide special experiences, can really pave out different pathways, different experiences that introduce kids to a whole host of things that they may be really interested in, what may catch their heart and grab their passion and maybe even steer and change the course of their life.
You know, it's a great thinking. And over the years, I've talked to so many people that said how many youth centers have been closed over the last decade across New York City, and safe spaces for kids to go or to get a meal in the evening while their parents are working. I guess the big question is, with budget deficits, how do we fund it? I know I took a quick look at the 2021 budget for City Council and saw $113 million allocated to fringe benefits. So I'm sure there's fat to chew off on the budgets, especially for those that are non-teaching and not in the classroom, helping our students grow and learn. But where do you see opportunities to put more money in the budget to fund those types of programs citywide?
Sure. Well, I think when you look at the Department of Education today, over these last several years, the previous mayor had really powered down to the principal, to the school level, to be able to really adapt to the needs and to be able to customize programming and teaching and classroom instruction and guidance to the facts on the ground. With this administration, that power has gone back up to the superintendents. But then even more than that, there's been another layer that's been layered in, the executive superintendents at huge salaries and huge costs. So I think that, not only will the public sector, our city employees, not only will we have to take a haircut for a period of time, we are all in this together, but there are some really obvious places in the city budget. Some of them are easy, like the executive superintendent. For the life of me, I can't figure out what in the world that layer of executive leadership has done or has accomplished over the last several years since they've been hired. But I think there are other things that are really going to be tough but important. We've got to look at the pension program. We've got to look at the other post-employment benefits, which include health care. We've got to look at defined contribution versus defined benefit. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we've got to look at, and we've got to recognize that this, as much as it is a crisis, it's also an opportunity. Because Nicole, this really concerns me. One of the big reasons I got into this race was it just broke my heart to see the lost opportunity that Amazon represented. And I've spent time with the residents of Queensbridge and folks in that area, the small business owners, and they said, listen, we were there, we were talking with Amazon, the unions were talking, we were going to negotiate a good deal for our community here in Long Island City. And I just feel so strongly that this is a time for us to be looking for ways to become more business friendly as a city and as a state. We're currently like 48 or 49 in terms of the least business friendly places in our nation. And what this means is, as other states and other cities, and you're seeing this right now, as they start to develop their kind of their groove and their music and their schools and their restaurants and their nightlife and their cultural institutions and all of those things that have typically been such a draw to New York, they also incentivize businesses. They keep their taxes at a lower level. They make it easier for folks to be able to move into those communities. They welcome folks coming in. Here in New York, we've been losing folks from the city over the last several years. Haven't seen any concern expressed by the mayor or the elected leaders. And in fact, most recently when, we're facing the pandemic and folks who either are not yet ready to come back to the city because they're seeing the surges in crime and in shooting and in death, to say, who cares? Somebody else will come take their place. That's just a flagrant disrespect for our city, New Yorkers who live in our city, both those who are of means as well as those who are working to become, more capable, more able to take care of their families. We all are in this together, and New York City will not work if we drive out the wealthy who pay disproportionately our taxes, who contribute vibrantly to our cultural and arts institutions, who love this city, but have been shamed for the last several years, have been demonized for being wealthy, have been, as we saw most recently, Steve Cohen, as the mayor, tried to stop him from buying the Mets. I mean, how crazy is that, with the disdainful comment of, well, you know, he's a hedge fund guy. This is just wrong. This isn't the way that a healthy city, a whole city, behaves. We must bring respect back to our city dialogue. We must have constructive relationships with the media, with elected officials, with leaders and civic stakeholders across our city. And it requires having a friendly business environment that aims for a more efficient government. Certainly it's going to be a leaner government, which means we have to make choices. We have to set up what are our priorities. And certainly education is right up there at the top. And we're going to have some very spirited discussions. My plan as mayor would be to absolutely listen to voices across the city and to engage communities and stakeholders. And then we're going to have to make some very difficult choices, but I will be transparent. I will make my values absolutely clear. And we will also set out what's the desired outcome, and we'll measure ourselves and hold ourselves accountable towards that outcome. But I really do believe that New York City's best days are still ahead of it. And yes, it's going to take all of us to respect each other, to honor our contributions, and to work like hell to build the future New York City.
And I appreciate what you said about, you know, principals this year have really expressed how they felt they had no control. They had no say. They were given things at the last second. And if we don't empower those that are in our schools, that are leading our schools, we can't, you know, empower our youth, and we can't make things better. So I appreciate that you brought that point up, because I think that's important to so many principals out there that are struggling right now and really feel that they're just a messenger of news and they're not part of the conversation, as much of the city does as well. Let's shift the conversation. Another important topic that was heightened and really a light was shown on it, even more so than ever before because of the pandemic, our homeless crisis. You know, as New Yorkers, we have our street homeless. We have so many people that work and still can't afford a home in New York City. The number of homeless New Yorkers has grown exponentially for the past decade. And like I said, the pandemic just shined a glaring light on this crisis. We have politicians who are pitting neighborhoods against each other. We have wonderful service providers like the Doe Fund who are working with neighborhoods like the Upper East Side and are a shining example of how to do it right. And politicians are saying, don't talk about it, Nicole. We don't want to talk about the good providers. You'll shine a light on them, and then the neighbors will be mad they're here. You know, I have to say, I looked at, according to the Coalition for the Homeless, in August 2020, it said there were 57,660 homeless people, including 12,866 homeless families, with 19,006 homeless children sleeping each night in New York's shelter system. Families make up 2/3 of the homeless shelter population. I can't even imagine the impact on those children trying to be educated right now in our shelter system. But we're going to focus on the other population because we've talked a lot about education. Let's talk about your work overall as founding commissioner of New York City's Department of Veteran Services, and how that program that you've mentioned can be scaled to address the growing homeless crisis in New York City.
You know, thanks so much, Nicole. I'm very proud of the work that we did, and this was not all done by my agency or by myself, but certainly it was a team of teams approach. It had started before I got here. By the time I got here and was appointed as commissioner, there was a vibrant public-private working group, the task force for ending veteran homelessness. We, we had really reached a plateau back in 2014, and I was invited to join that council. And I said, you know, really, I don't know a lot about homelessness. My soldiers for 30 years, they always had a home. And I want to learn, but I'm not sure what I can add at the beginning, but I'll bring my ignorance. Well, so I did that. And after the first meeting, two things that I noticed right up front. One was, Excel spreadsheets everywhere. We didn't have an automated tracker. Well, now we do. We didn't have veteran peer-to-peer buddy bonds. There's no stronger bond than the peer-to-peer bond between veterans. And of course, it's a human bond. It's a survival-based bond. We had plenty of social workers and managers and case workers and landlords and all kinds of folks, but we didn't have a peer-to-peer buddy bond. So we stood up a team of peers whose only job it is to take that veteran from the shelter to permanent housing. That lag time when we first started was over 600 days. We got it down to about 89 days and are still working hard because, after all, just as with the larger population with veterans, we had 80 to 100 new homeless veterans every month. So you have to really set up a system. And that was the huge step forward for us as we did set up that system. We then looked, once we got it automated and had a tracker, we were able to look at individuals and see what were the patterns. Because you can't case manage if you don't know the particular issues or factors that sort of ganged up on a given individual or family and resulted in them becoming homeless. We found three broad categories. One, I call them the enduringly homeless. These are folks who've got developmental disabilities, they've got severe mental health or mobility conditions. They require supportive housing, and they do very, very well with supportive housing, with the wraparound services. And I'll say that Mayor de Blasio really took a step forward in calling for 15,000 new units of supportive housing. We're going to need more, but that's a good start. And those individuals just do so much better. It's economically more advantageous for the city, and on a human level, it's really heartening. The next category, I call them the economically homeless. These are folks who are working full time, but they just don't make enough money to pay market rates here in the city. So for those folks, the key is, okay, sure, get them a subsidy so that they can stay in their homes. And by the way, this administration has invested a lot in legal services to prevent eviction. And that's been very, very helpful. If you can keep folks from losing their home, you're really well ahead of the curve. But you also need to work with those folks and see about getting them into coding classes or into learning a skill or a trade or something that can help them increase their ability to earn more money in a city like New York. The third category, I call them the episodically homeless, meaning they were doing okay, but at a certain point in time, they had an episode. Maybe it was losing a job, maybe it was going through a divorce, maybe it was a heart attack or some really monumental life situation that kind of bumped them off their equilibrium. Those folks, you've got to jump in, and just early intervention is key, because you want to catch them before they've dwindled down and have really lost so much in terms of respect and health and income and everything else that goes with being homeless. So I think that that's an important piece of this. The other thing that we did is we recognized that relationships are really, really critical. So we sought to build stronger relationships with the homeless veterans themselves. We then thought about the landlords. We thought, let's find out what their experience is. Well, they'd had a horrible experience. They couldn't bust through the city bureaucracy. We said, what do you need? They said, a real person. So we set up a hotline. And that way, landlords, when they get a unit that's free, they call, they get a real person, and they know that we don't put just any veteran in an open unit, but we put the best fit in that unit. And then we provide aftercare. To this day, the city doesn't provide aftercare. That's a huge, huge gap in homeless services, because it's not enough just to get them in the unit. Then you got to really help them adapt, and that's where our veteran peer counselors continue to work. But then there's more to this, because then you've got to really take a look at the supply side. And we had started doing that. There's a New York Land Opportunity Program that takes decommissioned churches and unused buildings and works in a public-private partnership to help the owners develop the business plans and actually decide what they want next for that property. And this has been done well in a variety of settings, and I think it could be done here in New York, converting the veteran service organizations like American Legion and others that perhaps could benefit, as other locales have done. For example, in Northern Virginia, we've had them come up here and talk to us about their experience. They went from an American Legion, sort of, you've seen it, just a little one-story building, to a multi-level resource community center, a hub with training, with space for community activities, and with housing. So I think that's one piece of this, but when you look at the broader issue, and people often say this to me, they say, oh, just because you worked with veterans doesn't mean you can do this for the whole city. Well, it's a different scale for sure. So here's what we've got to do for the entire city. All of those principles and practices that I talked about are necessary, but not sufficient to get us where we need to go. We have to make some very tough choices. We've got to get some rezoning. We've got to make sure that we can build mixed use facilities, housing and retail along transit corridors. We need to make sure that we can, do what other, places have been doing in terms of rezoning, building a second home on a lot, tiny homes. We need to, really figure out how can we add in duplexes and triplexes and do it in such a way that doesn't disrupt or violate the character of a neighborhood. We also, and this is a program that the city already has going, but I think we could really give it some more juice and attention. If you've got a spare bedroom, to be able to rent out that spare bedroom to someone who's homeless. So it's a complex set of issues. We know that well, we haven't even talked yet about the street homeless. That's a whole nother category that really is very complex. Our street homeless, the issues there are really integrally linked with serious mental illness, addiction, and where the city comes in is the policies regarding encampments and the location and presence of homeless individuals who are unstable on the street. And I know that this has been an issue in a number of neighborhoods, including the Upper West Side. And it's so important because, it is true that seriously mentally ill individuals as a whole are not more dangerous than non-seriously mentally ill individuals. But when those individuals are not treated, they are a greater risk to themselves, more volatile, more likely to lash out, and they're a risk to those around them. And I think that we as a city, we need to really tighten up our policies. It's the most compassionate thing that we can do, working with those who are seriously mentally ill and suffering. Another thing that we can do is bring the clubhouse model to scale, which is a made in New York invention. And it's a beauty to behold how seriously mentally ill folks can stabilize, can really tap into the power and the strength and the purpose of community and belonging. And I would encourage anyone, if you've never visited, for example, Fountain House, go take a tour. It's a real inspiration to see how human beings, even those who are so seriously mentally ill, when you invest in their potential, how amazing their progress can be. And it's a lot of work in front of us, Nicole, but this is my life work. I'm a psychiatrist. It makes me excited. I want to make sure that, when it comes to the homeless, where do they congregate? Well, it's in shelters, it's in jails, and it's in hospitals and ERs. And I think that we've got to do a better job of sorting out who is the homeless individual who really requires a secure diversion program instead of going into jail, who needs to go to a longer term facility, who needs to have Kendra's law invoked for assisted outpatient treatment. I mean, there's a whole complex layering. It's a system of systems. And as goes the homeless crisis in our city, so goes so many other factors and quality of life issues that are of concern to every New Yorker.
No, thanks. And you touched, Loree, on the homeless encampments. Over the past several years, we've definitely seen an increase in homeless encampments. And I'm curious specifically how you would be addressing these situations if you were mayor.
Sure. I think that we need to make it very clear that homeless encampments put both the residents, the homeless individuals themselves who are in the encampments, puts their health at risk and puts the public health of all New Yorkers at risk. It also depresses property values, drives further people away from the city. I think that what's going to be required, because these are difficult issues, and these are oftentimes the folks who, refuse to go into a shelter. They've had bad experiences there, they've been assaulted, or their things have been stolen. And I think that's particularly the population that could benefit from peer-trained, peer-to-peer intervention, and to work with them to get them on a better path. But for sure, encampments are not the answer. And once a city starts to relax or loosen that tolerance, that acceptance of encampments, look at Los Angeles right now. It's a horrific thing. And as mayor, I care for the homeless. I know the most compassionate thing that we can do is to establish a relationship with them, and then to do the assessment, figure out what are the situation, what are the particulars that apply to that human being, and what they and their family will require to get back on a different trajectory.
And I think, one of the questions we got asked was, we've heard so many times that many people don't want to go into a shelter because they're unsafe. And we hear service providers aren't being properly vetted. Contracts were pushed through during the pandemic and providers were approved without being vetted. What steps can we take to make sure that when we do have homeless shelter service providers, they're properly vetted, and that city contracts are negotiated in a manner that reflects the best interest of these New Yorkers, and the operations and spending and outcome data of homeless service providers is reviewed regularly, and that there's actually action taken when they fail to deliver?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The contract process is hugely important. And first of all, let me just say, we have got amazing service providers who care for the homeless, who work with them, who get them back on track. I mean, it's amazing. We also have some that are, not that caliber. And our contract processes have to discern between the two. What's also important, I've known some very, very good service provider organizations here in the city who've had to get out of caring for the homeless because they don't get paid on time. And a lot of these organizations, they're not-for-profit organizations, and they can't float their payroll and their carrying costs for months and months. There's no excuse for that. And as mayor, I would make sure that that entire vetting and contracting and timely reimbursement process, that's as a city, that's our credibility. We have so many organizations that are doing the tough work of, in this case, caring for our homeless. And we have to make sure that the training is there, that the performance requirements are there, that the track record is there. Let's get a 360 evaluation. The homeless themselves will tell us the truth, as will other providers, as will neighborhood and community members and stakeholders. But I think that there's a lot of work to be done here in the middle of the pandemic. We know that public health has to take the lead role. And we know that, thankfully, the dire predictions of what would happen during the pandemic to homeless individuals, that those dire projections, thankfully, have not borne themselves out, not only here in New York, but also around the country. There have been thousands, as we know, over 10,000, 11,000 nursing home patients who have died during the pandemic. It's really in the low hundreds for homeless individuals. And we're not really quite sure why that might be, but I think that communities around the country have taken action like we have in New York, and it's been difficult. We were on our way to decreasing the use of hotel rooms. We were down to, I think, I don't know, 3,000 or so hotel rooms when the pandemic hit. And now we've doubled that. And I think that as mayor, we're going to have to take a systems view and know that there will be another pandemic. We'll get through this one. We'll get the therapeutics, we'll get the vaccines, we'll weather this horrific winter wave, but there'll be another disaster of some sort or unexpected event, another superstorm, whatever it may be. And we have to be very agile. We have to challenge ourselves as city planners and working with the best of the private sector and our university partners here in New York to ensure that our planning processes learn the lessons from what we've just been through over these last several months and apply them in ways that will serve us well in the future.
You know, you raised the hotel shelter conversions. A question we got here, and you touched on some of it, but I want to ask this question. Hotel shelter conversions began in 2016. The city council budget specifically states they should be divesting from this practice because this type of shelter is limited in the ability to provide services and treatment. Will you continue the BDB policy of paying hotel owners to convert hotels to shelters?
You know, I would need to take a close look at that. Certainly, one ironclad requirement would be that if you're going to convert hotels and their rooms into shelters, you have to have services there present on site. You have to have supervision. You have to have security provisions. You have to have a regular process for communicating with the community and the neighborhoods surrounding that hotel. There's a whole bunch of things that need to go into place before you can have a successful shelter of any kind. And I think that in the lurch here, hotels can play a very instrumental role in addition to the emergency use that they're being engaged in right now, but also for places where individuals can be safely monitored. Either they've been exposed to COVID or they're COVID positive, but they're not sick enough for the hospital, but they can't safely quarantine at home. So I think that, you know, part of the opportunity coming out of this crisis, Nicole, is that, you know, we're going to have, at least certainly for a period of time, we're going to have some excess hotel facilities and room space. We're going to have some excess commercial real estate rooms and space. Mm-hmm. We have, because of the economic hit of this pandemic, we will likely have some distressed properties in the city. And I think, you know, rather than borrowing money to meet operating expenses or continue the expensive proposition of investing in hotels, we should engage in an all of the above approach and also look at investing in properties that can be really developed for the long haul and for which we will get a return on that investment.
Sure. Thanks, Loree. So the last question, we'll talk about budgets again.
Sure.
This question says, despite the fact that DHS maintains a large budget of more than $2 billion annually, the homeless population has grown for over a decade. Given the significant budget allocation, what can the city do differently to address this crisis? And would you support policy to require more oversight, transparency, and accountability from DHS?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think that over these last 6 or 7 years, yes, the DHS budget has over doubled, and yet the number of homeless individuals has increased. And this has happened during a time of, up until the pandemic, a time of really positive economic indicators. We were down to 3.5%, 4% unemployment before the pandemic hit. So there are a lot of questions here when it comes to how the city has managed the Department of Homeless Services. I think, for starters, there's a problem with the name. Department of Homeless Services makes it sound like it's in perpetuity, that you're always going to have homeless individuals and homeless services. I think that the culture is important here. And at DVS, what we named our unit that dealt with veteran homelessness was, we said, you know, it was the line of action for housing and support services. It gives it a different connotation when you say, I'm working for the Department of Housing and Support Services. That means you're really intent on moving that individual from shelter to permanent housing, providing the supports, the aftercare, and all that's required to keep them there. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done. The next commissioner for the Department of Social Services, under which, of course, DHS, the Department of Homeless Services, is situated, is going to have to be someone who can take a broad systems view and understand the consequences of the numbers going in all of the wrong directions, and perhaps can question the assumptions. The assumptions in terms of inclusion criteria going into the shelter, the assumptions governing the types of facilities and the types of programs that one advocates, whether it's for affordable housing, whether it's for secure diversion facilities, or whether it's for bringing the clubhouse model to scale. I just think that we need to take a complete relook. I think the mayor was correct when he said a couple of years ago that he had approached this problem like his predecessors had for the last generation, as a crisis. And yes, it does have crisis elements to it, but it is a long-term challenge that has to be managed, and we have to put together a strategy that absolutely takes into account all of the complexities, as well as all of the requirements, as well as all of the innovations that we can bring in, and perhaps they've been proven other places, and we can bring them to scale here.
Thank you, Loree. We are just around our hour mark, so I am going to, close with mine and then ask you if you want to have a few closing comments for everyone on these topics. I hope that you'll join us again as we talk about future topics. We had hundreds of people send in topics they wanted to talk about, quality of life issues, public safety, so many things. So we hope we can have you back for more topics. We can only fit in so many in one night. And given the announcement yesterday and the homeless crisis, these were two very important topics that people wanted to discuss. So I appreciate that. I want to thank you for coming on this evening. And again, I just want to tell everyone that's listening, the most important thing is that New Yorkers get out and vote, not in a presidential election year, but every time we have a chance to vote. We can't complain about who's leading our city if we didn't do something about that. Loree, is there anything else you want to say to the audience tonight, of parents and residents and families that are on regarding homelessness crisis, the education crisis, or anything else?
Well, Nicole, first of all, let me just say thank you so much. In ordinary times, I'd be out there, I'd be giving you all hugs and saying hi to old friends, making new friends, and conspiring together about the greater good, but here we are, and so we're making the best of this. And so I want to thank you for inviting me to this really generative forum. I always learn from these experiences, and I hope this has been helpful for you as well. I will say this going forward, we're just at 7 months until the June 23rd Democratic primary, and I echo what you said. We've got to wake up New Yorkers, get them out there to vote. If the pandemic has shown us anything, it's that who serves as mayor and as our local elected officials, it really matters. So this is a huge election in the life of New York City. you know, I'm continuing to develop my thinking, to learning as I go, and to listen everywhere I go. The question I ask is, if you were mayor, what would be the #1 challenge that you'd want to fix that would improve your life and the lives of those that you love and care about? And people just are eager to tell what's on their mind, to tell what their ideas are, to share, to be respected. And I think that that's something that, as I've said, I'm running for mayor to bring sanity and leadership to the city I deeply love and respect. And so let's just count this as the continuation of an ongoing dialogue. I'd love to come back and talk some more. In December, I'm going to have my budget framework that we'll put out there. This week, I put out the policing framework, my 3R policy. And, you know, we're also working on a rethinking, reimagining Rikers framework as well. Lots of things going on. And that's the opportunity of a crisis like this, is it opens up all kinds of ways of thinking and new approaches that would have been completely unthinkable just a few months ago. So thank you so much, Nicole. Thanks to everyone who's here tonight. And I look forward to next time as well.
Thank you, Loree, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be in touch with future topics, future conversations with other candidates, and future conversations with Loree Sutton, candidate for New York City Mayor, down the road. So thanks everyone for tuning in tonight, and have a great evening.
Thanks so much.